Hi everyone, I hope you're having a good evening. I'm going to get us started if that's all right. So for those of you who haven't seen me before, hello, my name is Will. Ben, do you want to say hi?
Hi, my name is Ben.
So hopefully you're aware of what these webinars are about. This is our sort of attempt to create a bit of a space to think about some of the challenges and positive experiences associated with class in relation to clinical psychology as a profession. So the plan for tonight is to hear from a couple of people who have kindly given up their Thursday evenings to come and tell us a bit about their experiences of training and working in the field, and to think a bit about kind of how that relates to some themes around working class. So hopefully that'll provoke some useful conversations. We've got hopefully 3 people who are going to speak tonight. So we have Dominic, Rochelle, and we have Amy, who are going to talk a bit about their experiences. I'll let them introduce themselves individually, but just for now, guys, do you want to turn your cameras on and give everybody a wave?
Yeah, I'm Dominic.
Oh, couldn't mic myself then. Hi, I'm Amy.
Hi, I'm Rochelle.
Thanks, guys. I'm still kind of getting to grips with Teams, to be honest with you, but what I have discovered relatively recently is that if you right click on the people who have now got the cameras on, you can pin them to your screen so that you end up looking at a few faces rather than just a sea of nothing. That's what I do. Okay, just a few practical things in terms of tonight. If you are watching live, we would ask that you keep your microphone and your camera off, just because otherwise it can get quite noisy and we can get quite a lot of feedback, and it makes things drag a bit. Sometimes there can be some mild tech issues, things can sometimes slow down a bit. Our sort of general plan of attack is to kind of just try and muddle through and see how it goes. Usually Teams might have a wobble, but usually it kind of picks itself up again. So if that happens, we'll bear with us and we'll try and get through it as best we can. If you do have a question, or if you do want to comment, we would really encourage you to kind of join in. We want this to be an active conversation as much as we can. So if you use the chat function on Teams, there's a little speech bubble on the sort of taskbar thingy, and that provides a meeting chat. So what I'll do is I'll put a quick thing in there to say hello, so you know where it is. So feel free to use that to ask questions, make comments, talk to each other. Ben and I, as the facilitators for the evening, will kind of keep an eye on the questions and sort of feed those back to our panel members as we're going through. Okay. What we'd also really like folk to do is tweet as well. So if you use Twitter, we're using the hashtag #ClassClinPsych, which is all one word. So please do tweet about the webinar so we can help get the word out as well. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything I need to say. Just one last thought is to just, again, I sort of said this before, I think, but please do remember to just be nice to our speakers. They're very kindly giving up their evenings to come and talk about some quite personal stuff. So we really welcome questions, we really welcome discussion, but let's just be kind to each other as we do that. Let's make sure we're looking after each other as we have these conversations. All right. We'll keep an eye on the questions in the discussion. We might not get to yours. Apologies if we don't, but we'll do our best to pick out some of the questions that we think will lead to some of the most useful conversations. All right. The plan of attack in terms of a schedule is we're going to hear from Amy first, then we're going to hear from Rochelle, then we'll probably take a bit of a break, just maybe 10 minutes or so to let people get away from the screen for a bit, and then when we come back we'll hopefully hear from Dominic, and then with a bit of luck that'll leave us with a bit of time at the end to just sort of have a bit of a kind of cute question and answer session. So if you've got any burning questions for the panel as a whole, feel free to throw them in as we're going along, or feel free to wait till the end. Okay, I think that's everything I need to ramble at you all about. So I will hand over to Amy.
I don't think I said what I did when I introduced myself. So I'm Amy, and I'm the trainee clinical psychologist on the Lancaster course. So I'm in first year. So yeah, I've got loads of notes on my phone, so I'm probably going to look down and look like I'm not interested in everyone here. But it's just because I'll forget otherwise. So yeah, I kind of feel really fortunate doing this after there's already been a couple of webinars, because I've found them so helpful to watch back over YouTube, just kind of identifying with everything other people have said, and kind of, I don't know, I think just this being a conversation on the table has helped me reflect on stuff for myself as well. So I think I'm coming with some thoughts and ideas that I probably wouldn't have had if I'd done it on the first webinar. So yeah, I guess bit about my background. So I'm from Manchester. I've grown up here, lived here my whole life, apart from when I went to uni. And I've always grown up on council estates and in council houses. So I don't know if people that don't know Stalybridge, I live in Stalybridge, which is like a town within Greater Manchester. It's kind of on the outskirts. So the Peak District is like right next to it. So it's got some really lovely affluent pockets, and then there's the bits where I live, which are not so affluent, quite deprived areas. So yeah, I've always grown up in this kind of area. Grown up with my mum, who's a teacher, and my dad was self-employed, so he did kind of gigs in nursing homes and stuff, singing to the old people, which was really nice. So we've kind of, yeah, I guess grown up struggling financially, but things took a bit of a turn when I was about 11, 12. So my dad passed away really suddenly. So we kind of really, well, just overnight turned into a single parent household. My mum was juggling being a full-time teacher and having 2 kids. And so was sort of being mistreated at work at the same time. So I think things around that time meant that financially things got a lot more difficult, and kind of got into a lot of debt and stuff. Yeah, which was a big struggle. So I guess that's sort of my background. In terms of sort of journey into clinical psychology, I think I was trying to think about that as a journey and thinking about what it was like. And I think I've always thought of it as a journey of just doing lots of hard work. But I think the more I think about it, there's just moments of luck/privilege, I think, that have got me to where I am. So I think quite unusually for me, it started in high school. So when I was sort of 14, 15, we had like a careers coach person. We did like an online quiz about our interests and stuff, and then had this session with a career coach. And at first the survey came back and told me that I should be an embalmer, which was slightly odd. But when I went and met with the career coach, we sort of chatted about what I was interested in. And she just told me about clinical psychology. So I was really young when I found out about it as a career, and it just sounded like something that I'd like to do. So I think quite unusually from that age, I've had that vision, that that's what I wanted to do. So I've kind of been able to work towards that. So since then, been trying to get all that voluntary experience and stuff. And one of my teachers as well, my psychology teacher at A-level, knew loads about clinical psychology, so was really helpful in helping me understand that. And really bizarrely as well, we had a book in my school library that was about getting onto clinical psychology, which again I think is completely bizarre, and not many people probably have had that experience. And I think I didn't quite appreciate how lucky that was until I've been thinking about my background, and I don't know, just how strange it was for me to go to a school that had that belief in me to even go to university, but to do such a professional career. And I guess I've been thinking a lot about how that happened because of coming from the background that I come from. I think if I'd gone to a school that was really local to me, that would have been completely different. So the high school I went to was about an hour's bus away, and it was a really, really good, well-performing school. It was Church of England. So the reason I got into that school was because my family's Christian, and my mum had taken me to church every week since I was born. And even though I did not believe in God at all, and I don't identify as Christian, it just managed to, it got me into that school that was really privileged. And I think the more I've thought about that as well, the more I've realised how, so that school's in Oldham. I don't know if people are familiar with Oldham as an area, but it's an area that, again, is quite deprived. And it's got quite a large population of South Asians, and it's quite predominantly Muslim faith as well. And I think, well, without a doubt, there wasn't many people in my school that weren't white Christians, and most people were also very affluent. So I don't know, I just think it was a massive, I've always thought of it as a moment of luck, but I think the more I reflect on it, the more it was a moment of my privilege, helping me to, I guess, just push on in that career. So yeah, and I think, I don't know, I think I've had quite a barrier to accepting that for a long time. I think ashamedly I've been in that camp of, I've not gotten where I've got to because of, white privilege or other types of privilege, but I think it was just not, I don't know, I was sat in that camp of, I've gotten here because I've worked really hard, but I think there's just moments of luck, like that career coach, that if it wasn't there, I could work as hard as I had worked and not be where I am. So yeah. And then the next bit of my journey was uni. So I think because I'd had that fortunate sort of meeting with that career coach. I knew what I wanted to do. I was really meticulous about planning university. So I picked a course where I would get an undergraduate master's, so I wouldn't have to pay for it myself. So that was before the postgrad loan came out. So I went to uni, and I think people have spoken about this in the other kind of webinars, but I think a massive thing for me at uni was accent. So part of that was nice because I had that really like northern identity, but in other ways it was really tricky. So kind of doing presentations and stuff with people, and I'd go last after 10 other people that was basically speaking the Queen's English to me. And then I had to start off by just being like, "Hiya, I'm Amy," and everyone was kind of, I don't know, just makes you feel a little bit inferior, I think. And I don't know whether I still have that accent, because I think on an unconscious level, I definitely changed it throughout uni. And I think there was just something about being in that environment as well. Of my university was there's a high percentage of people that were privately educated, or if they weren't privately educated, they were just incredibly wealthy. And it was a kind of wealth I've never even had friends who were that wealthy before. It was, I don't know, just a bit jarring to be in that kind of environment. And I think that with the accent kind of, yeah, just makes you feel like you sort of don't belong a little bit. Yeah, I guess the other thing about uni that I think in a way it was a barrier, but I think right now it's more of a benefit, I think, of the background. So I wouldn't say finances were a barrier for me to get to uni, because I got full loan, and it wasn't that I wasn't going to be able to go, but I would say there was lots of moments throughout uni where money was just a massive stress. So examples I can think of is like, so in first year, my student loan, even though it was the maximum, didn't cover my rent. So I was already in my overdraft from first year. And then getting a student house, my mum had to be a guarantor on the deposit thing. But because her credit score wasn't good enough, I had to pay a double deposit. So that was about 800 quid to be able to move into a house in second year, which was another chunk of my overdraft. And there was a point in uni where I'd just completely run out of money, didn't have the money for rent, and had to go to uni to get the student hardship fund. And that was just, I don't know, it was just a horrible experience, isn't it, to have to kind of beg for money from a very, very affluent university. And I think at the time they were barriers, but I think it's really helped me to understand how much money can impact your mental health. I think it's easy to think, yeah, money's stressful, but it's fine kind of thing. But I think it's just unimaginable stress when you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, when you don't know how you're going to pay your rent or what's going to happen. So I think for me now, sort of in clinical psychology and working, that's been a real benefit, just to understand that kind of stress, and be able to talk about it with people that I work with as well. I'm just trying to think what else I've written down. Yeah, some of this stuff is similar to what people have said, but when I was quite fortunate that as I left uni, I got an assistant job quite quickly. I was really lucky in that the job that I got forgot to put on the application form that I needed a car, and didn't realise I didn't have a car until I got to the job. So if they'd not done that, I wouldn't have had the job. And I think other people have spoken about that being a barrier as well. But I guess there was some experiences while I worked. I was in a children and family service, and there were some kind of experiences that were just quite jarring, I guess. So particularly thinking about people's upbringing, so the families that we worked with, and some very judgmental ways of talking about that. So we did a lot of home visits, for example, and there would be people that would kind of talk about a family's house in quite a judgmental way. So it would either be like, oh, that house is so empty, like the kids have nothing to play with, or one time it was about there being a bit of dog mess on the floor, for example. And just the way that people talked about that was really shaming, and about the area not being very nice. And then I would go to visit that house, and it would be exactly the same as the house that I grew up in. And other stuff like there was a checklist that I looked at once that was about neglect, basically. So different things that indicate someone's been neglected, and one of them was not having a dining table or a dining room. And I just thought I think at that point I'd never eaten at the table other than at a restaurant, so it was just really bizarre to me that was classed as neglect. I think even sometimes it's the way people talk about that stuff. So I remember another example of someone was talking about a family they'd been to see where they were putting in like a safeguarding referral for lots of different reasons, but they were talking to me about how disgusting it was that there were so many pets in the house and there was so much like fur everywhere and mess, and just it just felt really odd and shaming to me, because I remember my mum telling me when I was born, I think she had like 12 cats or something, and I don't know, it was just interesting to think about how that person that was talking to me about the family she'd visited, how she would have described my home that I grew up in and what that would have made her think about me, I guess. There's loads of examples of that kind of stuff, to be honest. I think another one that's been on my mind recently, with the government announcing all the stuff about tackling obesity, and there's been a lot of conversations on Twitter about how difficult it is to be able to afford to eat healthily. And it's just really reminded me of, there was a situation when I was at school, I think I was like 6 or 7, and I opened my lunchbox and I just had like 2 carrots, like raw carrots, just chopped up because there was nothing else in the house. And I'm just finding it really interesting that people are kind of pricing up a bag of potatoes to say that poor people can afford to eat healthily, when, I don't know, you can't exactly just go to school with a, raw veg or whatever. So yeah, I'm just trying to think what else I'd put down to say. I don't know how much time I've got left either, actually, but I guess they're all stuff about my experience. I guess on wider reflection, one of the things I've really been thinking about is what have been the barriers before, because I think before this I've never talked about my class really, and never reflected on it for myself even. And I was thinking about what the barriers were. I think one of them definitely is just it not being a conversation on the table. And I think these webinars being here really helped that. I think for me, another thing was, I guess in approaching this webinar, I was getting quite anxious about talking about my upbringing. And I was trying to think about why that was, because I'm quite an open person, I'm not sort of shy about talking about my experiences. But I think for me, potentially, I was quite anxious about, I guess, so for context, I still live in my family home, so my mum's bedroom's just there, so she can probably hear what I'm saying. And there was something about my mum hearing me talk about my upbringing, and that being shaming in a way, I don't know. It made me think about where that's come from, and I don't think it's from me, because I certainly don't blame my mum for my upbringing, but I think society does. And there's that, I think it's come up in other webinars as well, stuff about kind of internalized shame, and yeah, I don't know. I think that was just a barrier for me in talking about it, and probably has been before. Yeah, I think there's probably other stuff, but I've got a feeling I've gone over or I'm near the time anyway. So yeah, I guess the other thing that I definitely thought about actually was I can't remember who it was in one of the previous seminars was talking about imposter syndrome, and about that kind of being even harder when you get into the profession, because you sort of notice that you're around a lot of middle class people, for example, and you're working class. And I didn't experience that when I got into the profession. If anything, it's felt better, but I was thinking about when that happened for me. And just about, I don't know, the moment that you realise you're different, maybe. I think for me that was at school. Other people were quite affluent, and I remember waiting for the bus home and with a couple of friends, and the bus came over that I was going to get on, and one of them was talking about how, oh, don't get on that bus, it goes through like a really rough estate and they're all benefit scroungers and they live in squatty council houses. And my other friend was, oh yeah, that's Amy's bus, that's where she lives. And yeah, I think that was just, I don't know, it was the moment I realised I lived in a council house. That wasn't even knowledge to me at that point. Didn't even realise that it was a thing, because it was just my house. And I don't know, I think there's something about when you realise you're different, and that being potentially where that imposter syndrome begins. And I think for my personal experience, that is definitely where it began. And I think it's kind of impacted confidence and stuff going through that. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that point. It's kind of come to a natural end. Yeah, I think that's everything I have to say. There's probably more that I've forgotten, but.
Thank you, Amy. That was really lovely, really honest. Appreciate it. If anyone's got any questions for Amy, feel free to either pop them in the chat or to chat.
Amy, I was just curious, you kind of touched on this for a wee second about when you were talking about money and stuff, but I suppose, is there anything that you think your upbringing and your experience so far has kind of added to your practice, you know, the kind of coming into the profession? Do you think it's has it benefited you in any way?
I think I am just more appreciative of it. I think people in the profession would acknowledge that having no money is stressful, but I think there's just something different about experiencing it, and I just think it's different to be stressed about money and to be like absolutely encapsulated by the fact that you can't afford whatever it is you need, and something about kind of having to ask for help as well. I think I've had conversations with clients and stuff before where I know they maybe mentioned in passing that they're a bit stressed about money, and I think it could be easy to just gloss over that, but I always try and talk to them about that a little bit to see, I don't know, either if there's anything you can do to help or just generally talk about that, and for it to be to acknowledge that that's something that's probably really difficult and is impacting whatever it is that's going on for them. Yeah.
So something that springs to mind for me when you say that is about kind of accessibility of services, and I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, Amy, so sorry for that in advance, but I'm just thinking about kind of an appreciation of the sort of some of the barriers of coming to see a psychologist. The obvious one being money to get there, money to pay for a car, or money to pay for bus fare, parking, all the kind of barriers like that. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about, maybe, obviously a lot of us are doing remote working. I know you're doing a lot of remote working and telephone stuff at the minute. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about how that kind of, those kinds of issues might be reflected in some of the more remote working that people are doing currently.
Yeah, I guess I haven't come across this myself. I think I've been fortunate that everyone I've worked with has got access to technology and stuff, but I know there's people on the course that are struggling when, I don't know, I think we just take it for granted that everyone's going to have a phone that can connect to Teams, or has got like a laptop that's got a good enough connection, or I think technology can be a bit of a barrier with that. I know, thinking back, because I think it's weird to talk about this stuff when you're in a position like now. I'm paid a very good salary, so it's not the same as it was, but I think going back to then, I had an awful laptop that there's no way I could have connected to have spoken to someone on video chat, or like a long period in secondary school I didn't have a mobile phone when everyone else did because we couldn't afford one. So I think there's definitely barriers like that. I think in a way it's easier because you don't have to drive and park and stuff, but I think there's still I guess barriers for different people for different reasons. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, well, I guess I didn't really have a direction in mind. I think the thing I was maybe wondering was, does us as a profession maybe doing a bit more remote working maybe open up some of those things as well? You know, it's maybe easier for people to access psychology over the phone rather than having to come to an appointment. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely one of the people I'm working with now has really struggled to get to appointments in the past. Potentially not because of financial reasons, but just because it's incredibly anxiety provoking to leave the house. So I think for them, you know, it's really helpful. And I definitely think it's going to change things, because I think there was a bit of a like, oh, there's no way we can work from home. It's just not like, it's not possible. But I think it's obviously possible. So I think there's less excuses to not be a bit more flexible now, because we've proven that you can do it.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to look to there's loads of lovely, I don't know if you can see the chat, there's loads of lovely comments coming through, which is really nice. Thank you for those of you who've written comments. Dominic, Rochelle, have you got any kind of questions or comments in response to anything Amy said?
I just said I think it's I was really interested to hear about being a bit nervous beforehand and thinking like, why is it going to be difficult to talk about, because normally I'm pretty open about my class and stuff like that. And I certainly kind of thought the same with you. And then I was also thinking about things like family and how what we talk about might go down with our family. And I actually kind of had a bit of a chat and a brief with my two brothers and my dad, who we often talk about class quite a lot and often talk about lots of political issues over a few beers and stuff. It's just kind of thing we have. And I felt the need to have that conversation, just because I wanted to know if there's anything that felt shouldn't be said, or if there was a totally different perspective and may have a totally different perspective on class that hasn't held back, or it has, and things like that. So I think it was just really nice to hear that, because I haven't heard anyone say that before. So it was nice to kind of connect on that point.
Yeah. I'd not even thought about it before, to be honest, but I think it's just came up because I had to talk about it, I guess, in a public way. So it's kind of forced to think about it. But yeah, I think even I don't think I've ever spoken to my family about class. I don't think because it's just, I don't know, if that's how you grow up, it's just who you are, isn't it? I wouldn't say we have those conversations. So I think, I don't know, I guess it's all new to me, even reflecting on it and thinking about it. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you to everyone who's commenting as well. I'm just reading the comments and smiling. It seems like it's generated a lot of really nice reflections. So yeah, thank you for sharing, folks. Should we let Amy off the hook, let her kind of catch her breath, and move over to Rochelle? Rochelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello. Can you firstly hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. My name is Rochelle. I'm a clinical psychologist. I qualified in 2015, and I work in recovery and rehabilitation. In terms of today, I've got lots I could talk about on this topic, so I've made quite a few notes. And I hope I have enough time to cover everything. And if I'm going on too much, I suppose Will and Bell will know, let me know and tell me to kind of cut it. So there's a few things I want to say before I start. Firstly, I do recognise that I'm the first BAME person of colour on the panel. And I don't really like the term BAME, so I'm going to use person of colour instead. And thinking about it, I put my name down to do this because I thought I could offer my experiences and it would be helpful, but then I got a bit nervous and I was going to pull out in the end, but then it made me kind of think, why am I doing that? And I suppose being here on this panel, and the panel so far hasn't had a person of colour, it's made me feel quite exposed. But at the same time, I had to think about this, and the fact that I am a clinical psychologist and I've got to this part of my career, it made me think that there's going to be people of colour who are aspiring clinical psychologists, or they're going to be training clinical psychologists or even qualified, that have possibly had similar experiences to me. And I felt as though if I can come here and give a voice to my experiences, it can help them kind of relate to a similar kind of background that we all come from. And at the same time, they might kind of think, actually, you know what, I'm not going mad, I'm not kind of going crazy. And at the same time, they might be thinking that, you know what, I can understand why I'm doubting myself as well. So in terms of that, I'll come onto it when I talk about it later, which will give a bit more context why I say that. The second thing I want to say as well is that I don't feel like I need to state this, but I'm going to state it anyway. When I'm talking about my experiences, I don't speak for anyone else. So I'm a South Asian, Bangladeshi, Bengali man in particular, and I'm not talking on behalf of people of colour or BAME. So I don't want anyone to come away from this and think, oh, his experiences is universal when it represents anyone. In particular, I don't want anyone to kind of think, oh, these are the experiences he's had and it must relate to black people. I'm not talking on behalf of black people in particular. If you want to know what black working class aspiring psychologists, trainees and psychologists go through, you'll have to ask them. There's not many in our profession, which is a problem in itself. But if you're lucky enough to know a black person in this profession, you're gonna have to ask them. Thirdly, I thought about what I wanted to talk about today, and I feel comfortable with everything that I want to talk about. But I didn't feel that I could talk about being working class in this profession and not talk about race, as I feel that both of these two things for me are very significant in terms of my experiences growing up in life and where I find myself in terms of where I am in my career right now. Saying that, I understand that talking about race is difficult for someone like me, people of colour, and typically what tends to happen is that we feel the need, because of the way we've been conditioned, to centre white people's feelings. And today I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk about my experiences and talk about what it was like being South Asian, being Bengali, being working class, and coming through to this profession. So in terms of my background, I was born in London. When I was born, my family were living in temporary hospital accommodation in Paddington, and then a couple of months later we got a council flat in East London, and then I've lived on a council estate my whole life. So the flats were broken down, but new houses were made, so we moved into a house. But I grew up in East London my whole life. Still live in East London. Growing up, my dad used to work in a factory just down the road in Hackney, and most of my life actually, he was kind of ill when he would work, and he was ill again, and then he passed away when I was 9. So my mum was a single mum, and she raised us. So I had 2 older sisters and then a toddler. My younger sister was a toddler at the time. So we were basically raised by a state in terms of benefits, and that's all I ever knew in terms of having money. It meant, do we have enough benefits? If I wanted to buy a new pair of trainers, do we have enough money from benefits, for example? I went to college, EMA, someone else talked about it last time, EMA, £30 a week, which was massively helpful to get to college and come back. Went to university, paid for by the state in terms of tuition fees, etc., and you get a grant on top. But apart from that, I suppose I would say I just remember growing up poor. And when my dad was alive, I remember in terms of like washing powder, we would get DAS. And when he passed away, we was on benefits. So that's when I realised we're not getting DAS anymore, we're getting the supermarket branded stuff. In terms of kind of Cocoa Pops, I remember like the actual brand. And then once we were on benefits, we were kind of having the supermarket brand. And that's when I realised, at the age of 9, that we were poor. So that was my kind of experiences growing up. I want to talk a bit more about my childhood, and that links into my reality, the way I grew up and the impact that that's had on me. So kind of, if I had to describe my childhood, I would say the main 3 words in terms of outside the home, I would say was paranoia, fear, and at times it was terror as well. And what I mean by that is I grew up in East London, like I said, on a council estate, and it was in the early kind of like 90s and then the early 2000s. And East London, as you guys know, back in the day, was a very rough place. There was loads of gang fights going on. The Asians between the whites, everyone was just fighting everyone. There was a lot of racism as well, and I grew up with a lot of racism around me. My experiences of growing up in a white working class area, an estate, was that I grew up thinking I was a foreigner, even in the land I was born in. I grew up kind of with the idea that me and my people, Bengali people, we were here and we were some kind of virus to white working class people. So most of the kind of danger that I've experienced came from white working class people growing up. And I can understand it now, but when I was younger, it was just kind of like, why do they hate us? Why do they not want us here? There was a lot of, when are you going to go back to your own country? So growing up, I was a bit confused. Like, I'm born here, but am I not really from here? What's going on? What is my identity? So typically, Asian people of colour come from larger families. So we would be prioritised in terms of housing, etc. And the white working class families felt hard done by the government, in the sense that they felt that they should have been given these housing first instead of people of colour. So there was a lot of hostility, a lot of resentment towards government, for example, and that was directed towards us. I remember kind of walking down the street and having to kind of double check, always walk down the street and make out I was looking at somewhere, but I was just checking if I was going to get attacked from the back. I remember there was times when the white working class people would set their dogs on us. There was a time when feces was put through our letterbox as well. So on the outside, there's always danger, and that was coming from white working class people. Kind of, I was called an apple. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it. So an apple, what it'd be like, you effing apple. An apple, when I was growing up, it stood for all packies, please leave England. So that was my reality growing up. And so for me, there was a sense of physical danger, but that danger was coming from white working class people. So race is difficult to talk about, but for me, being working class is also difficult to talk about as well, because when we talk about being working class, typically you hear the term white working class, and I have to think to myself, like, am I not in this category? So although we're not a homogenous group, I don't know whether I know I'm working class, but when we're talking about working class, my initial reaction is, do they see me in that group as well? And my feeling is I'm not part of that group, because when, like I said, my experiences growing up was, you're taking from us. You've come over here, you've ruined our culture, you've taken over space, you've taken over resources. So you're taking from us. So it's difficult for me to kind of really kind of place myself in being working class. And then with all the news reports of kind of mass immigration, for example, etc. These are the kind of stories and rhetoric I've heard from a very young age. There's some noise in the background.
Yeah, sorry, I think somebody's got the microphone on and we can just hear it coming through. Would you mind just checking that you're muted? Thank you.
Great, cheers. So I'll move on. Why clinical psychology? But before I talk about why clinical psychology, I think it's important to mention kind of like motivation for education, etc. So my parents came from Bangladesh, came to this country to give us a better life, and in doing so, most ethnic minority families will tell you to become either a doctor, either a lawyer, an engineer, and if you're not one of those three things, you're practically a disappointment. So kind of there was this strong sense that we've come over here, and you should be grateful that you are here instead of being back home. Your cousin could have been here and you would have been back home. So from a very young age, from my family, there was a sense that you need to do well in life. We've come here and we've made sacrifices. We've left home to come here. So you should be grateful you've got a privilege as well. I've got a few memories which I think is really interesting to talk about because it kind of fits in as well. I remember being in primary school, and one of the teachers sat us all down. I don't remember the context and how this came about, but the teacher was telling us that only 2 of us will make it to university, and the rest of us wouldn't kind of go into higher education. And that scared me, and there was a fear there of not going into university. And the reason for that was most of the men within my community, uncles, cousins, etc., most Bangladeshi men worked in restaurants as chefs and cooks. And the fear there for me, which sounds really funny, but for me, my threshold for breaking into a sweat is really low. So in my head as a child, I was thinking, if I'm working in a kitchen, I'm gonna be kind of breaking into a sweat and I can't do this. So for me, the fear of that reality was just so powerful, and it kind of set in for me that I need to make something of my life. So obviously kind of being told you have to do something with your life, and then this fear of working in kitchens. And then there was another situation I remember. A previous pupil from our primary school was asked to come back and talk to us about his experiences of kind of going through school, etc., and going into university and then getting a job. And I remember this quite clearly. It was a Sikh man. He came back and he was wearing a navy blue suit. And I remember looking at his suit and thinking, oh, that looks really nice. And he talked about how he was in this school, and if he could do it, we could do it as well. And I don't really, at the time, I didn't really understand what he was talking about in terms of university. I just knew it was a bigger primary school. And for me, the reason why I'm telling you this and why it was important was because even though he was Sikh and I knew he wasn't the same as me, because my people didn't wear the turban, he was still brown, right? And because he was brown, I saw myself in him to a certain extent, and I could, in my head, I was like, if he can do it, I can do it. And this is why representation matters so much. And that was also a kind of motivating factor for me to kind of think, I need to kind of do something with my life. So I was somewhat bright in primary school and secondary school. I went to college and I kind of lost my way, and I struggled in college because I didn't really know what I was going to do. I didn't really have kind of a lot of confidence. I kind of managed to scrape through and get into university. When I got into university to do psychology, I remember one of the first lectures we had, they brought out this diagram, and it was BSc psychology, and then you had all the different kind of fields: forensic, child, educational, clinical, counselling, etc. And I just felt overwhelmed, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was messing around in uni, I wasn't really focusing too much. And in the second year, I chose this module called Psychology of Addictions. And we had to come up with a treatment plan for a person who had substance misuse. And it was in doing that kind of module, Psychology of Addictions, that's when I realized that, you know what, this is the kind of route that I wanted to go down. And then once I kind of sorted it out in my head, I kind of knuckled down, got in good enough grades to go get a decent grade actually. So that's what happened. Towards the end of my third year, there was a scheme that was starting up by this psychologist called John Cape. I'm not sure if he actually started it, but he was the face for it. And it was called Widening Access to Clinical Psychology. And basically, he recognised that the profession is dominated by middle class, typically white women, and then at the top you've got middle class white men. And he wanted to make a change, bring in more people of colour. So I put my name down and I said, I enjoyed the addiction module, so I said I wouldn't mind going to work in an addiction service. So I got an honorary assistant post in an addiction service for about a year. And I know there's been lots written about this in terms of exploitation, etc., etc. But for me, I benefited from it in the sense that it gave me that foot in the door to be able to get the experience that I needed. And then off the back of that, I got a job in IAT in East London, which was great as well, working with Bengalis and working with East End people. So that was really good. I didn't need to change my accent or anything like that. I'll come on to that later. So I worked in IAT for a couple of years, and I applied for the doctorate when I was about 24. And then I got on to UCL. So yeah, that was my journey into clinical psychology. There was no, and I know a lot of people talk about it in terms of apply for this course here and this course here and stuff like that. For me, really, I had to stay in London. There was no opportunity for me. So it's really UEL or UCL. Those were the main two that I could have gone because where I was living and kind of family situation as well. All right, I want to talk a bit about accent and being a tenant of council housing as well. And I know people talk about accents a lot. And for me, they were both kind of a great deal of shame. As you can hear, I talk in a very Cockney East End accent, and which I didn't know I had until I was about 21, until someone told me I have a Cockney accent. I thought I spoke Queen's English, but that's another story. And but there was a lot of shame attached to that, kind of in the sense that people would kind of make a mockery of my accent. They would tell me how low class it sounds. Even today, for example, I was telling my mate I was doing this, and he was like, "I'll make sure you talk properly." And I kind of just laughed it off. But it's just one of those situations where it's the ridicule, for example, and people will make derogatory remarks, etc. There was a few times when people have actually said to me that they didn't expect me to be intelligent. When I was on my assistant post, and even when I was in my PWP post, we were talking about something, and somehow someone kind of decided they thought it was a backhanded compliment to say to me, "Oh, I didn't think you were intelligent." And I don't know if that's because I was Bengali coming from the East End with a Cockney accent. I don't know which one led them to believe by just kind of looking at me and being around me to think that I was unintelligent. But I know other people have spoken about this, the sense that if you have certain accents, it gets correlated with not being intelligent. So this is saying other people talked about it. When I was around middle class people, I would put on the telephone voice or the white voice or the posh voice, whatever kind of term you want to use. And it's ridiculous when we have to do this, because even though I'm doing it, I can hear myself talking. I'm like, why are you doing this? Well, just stop it, just talk with your normal accent. But the stress that comes from it, because of the fact that people in the past have said, "Oh, you don't sound intelligent," for example, I naturally used to do it. There was a situation I remember when I was at university. If you go to UCL, outside of Gooch Street Station, there's a fruit and veg stall. And was walking down to get lunch, and the fella, I was going to say geezer, the fella who runs the stall, he's Cockney, and he's shouting out, "Come and get your fruit and veg, pound for a pound." And as soon as I heard this, my back just completely tensed up, because I knew what was coming. And I remember the trainees that I was with, I was just like kind of waiting for one of them to stop mocking it, and which they did. Like, "Oh, pound for a pound, pound for a pound," and stuff like that. So I just laughed it off. But the issue for me is that underneath the joke, there's a sense of ridicule there, that you sound stupid or you sound unintelligent. And that's something that's always bothered me. So kind of what I've done is instead, like, I've owned the fact that this is how I talk. Grew up in East London, got a Cockney accent or East End accent. This is it. I'm not going to change it anymore. And I've been working on that as well. So when I notice it happening, I kind of stop, reshape my mouth, and then go back to talking like I should be talking, how I normally talk. And then the other thing as well was in terms of growing up on a council estate. That was something that was a great deal of shame when I'm around middle class people, particularly. if they ask, oh, where do I live? I just say, oh, I live in East End, not be more specific. And the fear there is for, if you tell someone, oh, I grew up on a council estate, they will kind of ask you, oh, what was that like? Oh, what was that like? And a sense of like they're pitying you. They want a story from you about your experiences, and that really used to bother me. So I just say, I just live in East London. But the thing I've learned to do now is embrace it. Kind of, this is the life that I've lived. I grew up on a council estate. I talk like I do. I don't need to hide it. I don't feel shame now for what I am, who I am, the experiences that I've had, and this is who I am. So I've learned to embrace it, and in the sense that if people feel the need to make a mockery, I kind of pull them up on it now, like, oh, what do you mean by that? So, and that's really helped me to kind of rid the anxiety that I feel within myself. So it's not really something that I need to hold anymore. So it's not that it's completely gone, but it's significantly reduced. So that's one thing I will say to the people that are listening, is that kind of embrace who you are, embrace the experiences that you've had, kind of don't shy away from it. And if people are going to try to ridicule you or shame you, pull them up on it. So that's what will be my advice on that. In terms of being on the doctorate, for me, kind of, it was when I started on the doctorate, I'd been in East London for most of my life, and then I kind of didn't get into UEL, so I went to UCL, and then going to UCL, kind of being in middle class white spaces for me was really threatening. I could feel my stress levels coming up. I could feel an apprehension, and for the first 6 months anyway, there was this anxiety that I was going to be kind of questioned. How did you get onto the course? Was it some kind of positive discrimination? So I felt like there was going to be some kind of attack, whether it be because of my race or because I'm kind of working class. So that's something I kind of carried around with me. There was always this sense of tension for about a good 6 months. In this sense that I didn't earn my place in the course. So basically, it was this sense that you didn't earn your place here, or you've taken a place from a white working class person. And that's something that I kind of took with me onto the course. So like I say, it kind of went on for about 6 months, and I could always remember kind of feeling anxious in group talk kind of situations and stuff. And then it went away, and I felt more settled, and it was okay. And then there was a situation towards the end of the first year when there was a trainee in the year above, a white woman, trainee clinical psychologist, who basically racially abused me. And it really significantly affected my confidence. It was quite traumatic for me, actually. I told university about it. I don't really feel that they handled it as well as they should have. What happened was she was asked to call me and apologise. And then during the call, she played the victim. She done the whole white women tears, etc. And she then, the main thing I remember from that call was she was saying that there's too many of you. There's too many Asians on clinical psychology training. And I don't know when she went about to do an audit of this, but that's the thing that I remember. She was meant to call me and apologise, and the thing that she was saying was there's too many Asians, and that kind of brought up so many things about, you're not welcome here, you're taking up space, and that for me was significantly traumatizing through going through the doctorate. I didn't make too much of a fuss about it because, as you can imagine, there's so much to do during the doctorate. I just wanted to kind of let it slide and go. So that was something that was majorly traumatizing. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about kind of this issue within kind of people of colour that we kind of face. And I know Ben talks about it in one of the other ones as well, this sense of a foot in each camp. You're kind of like middle class, and then you're kind of like working class at the same time. And what I mean by that is, growing up, kind of, I'll show you this. I've got it on my phone. I don't know if anyone's seen this before. Probably have. You probably can't even see it. I'll describe it to you. So it's Berry's model of acculturation. So you've got home cultural identity, you've got host identity as well. And there's a difference between integration, assimilation, marginalization, and rejection. And when my people came here, there was a lot of racism, so they didn't really integrate into British culture. So there's a strong rejection of the host culture, and there's a strong acceptance of kind of own culture. And then as time went by, certain people from my community would then go on to become lawyers or doctors, etc. And I remember a lot of these people, they would have this kind of arrogance and this condescending tone to their voice whenever they talked about my people, the fact that we don't work hard enough, or we're okay to just be on benefits, etc. And it kind of, what I remember as a child was, I don't know if I relate to you anymore. So you've gone and done well in your life, but you're talking down about my people, and this sense of you're not actually one of us anymore. Like you're actually one of them now. Like you're becoming aggressive to us, and kind of that was something that kind of stayed with me, which was, as I progress in my career, I don't want to be one of these people that becomes aggressive to my own people. And that was something that I always made sure that I identified. I'm Bengali and working class, etc. And I was never going to turn on my own people like that. The funny thing is, getting onto doctorate, I remember kind of, if I corrected one of my mates, they would be like, "Oh, you think you're better than us now?" Oh, you think you're white now? That was the other one. Because if you're getting better, you're white. So, oh, you think you're white now, for example. And my mum would be like, "Oh, don't be going around getting a big head." And I was like, "You're the one who wanted me to become a doctor, do well in my life, and now you're trying to humble me. You don't need to humble me, right? I know who I am. I don't think I'm better than you. I am you. We are the same people. I don't identify as something else now. I am still me. I'm still Bengali. I'm still working class, whatever that means now, because obviously you got a doctorate as well. But that sense, that kind of stayed with me. So I just wanted to kind of mention that in terms of like foot in both camps. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about this as well. And no one else has mentioned this. When you kind of study at UCL, you know this as well. You come out of the building and you've got Planet Organic across the road. You've got Starbucks, you've got Cafe Nero, you've got Costa, you've got all of them next to you. And I remember before lecture started, people will come in with a hot drink, coffee, latte, whatever you want to call it. First break, people go to get another hot drink. Lunchtime, people get another hot drink. The second break, they'll get another hot drink. And I'm thinking, like, you're spending £10 a day on hot drinks, right? And the reason why that was so difficult for me was because being poor, we never had the luxury of to go into a shop and buy coffee for £3. And obviously at the time, East London wasn't gentrified, so we didn't have all these fancy coffee shops anyway. And the thing that kind of stuck in my mind was what my mum would always tell me in Bengali, which was, before you spend a penny, remember, like, think about how you're spending that penny. And that would always ring in my head, this kind of thing of, we're poor, and any penny that you spend, remember, think about how you're spending it. So I remember one day going, you know what, I've worked for this. I'm going to go get myself a coffee from Planet Organic. So I marched over there with all the other trainees, and I spent like £3 on a hot drink. And I just remember the dissonance that I felt drinking it, knowing that actually this is costing a lot more than I would normally pay. And it was a journey. I felt like kind of recognizing that, you know what, I kind of achieved this much and I'm earning this wage now. It's okay to spend £3 on a coffee, whereas back in the day that just wouldn't have happened. No one's mentioned that, and I thought it'd be interesting to mention that, the fact that you have money now and how you're going to spend it. So that's what I wanted to kind of talk about today. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. I think it was really just really amazing to hear you kind of reflect so honestly and so openly about some of those things. I don't know if you've been able to keep an eye on the chat as you've been talking.
No, I'll turn it off because I want to get distracted.
Yeah, it's really quite distracting. Yeah, so there's some wonderful comments, and I think a lot of your points have generated some good discussion, some reflection from other people wanting to share as well. I must admit, I don't know the Berry model, so that's a bit of homework for me to go and read up on as well. So thanks for mentioning that. Yeah. I just wondered, are there any particular papers that you'd point us towards if we're not familiar with that?
With that model,
sorry,
I
did a link to the Wikipedia article that mentions acculturation. So the Berry model is on that link. There's a handful of papers on it and stuff as well, so you can have a wee Google this evening, Will. There's things there about acculturation. There was a lot of Hackney love there. I didn't realise that the population of Hackney were in the chat this evening, but there's been a lot of Hackney solidarity.
I just wondered if anyone had any particular questions for Rochelle. There's been lots of good comments, lots of good, lots of love. But yeah, any particular questions?
I had just a very brief anecdote that I wanted to share, because the comment about like the coffees and stuff, like it just really resonated for me. But when I was in first year of training, we had to do like a behavioral experiment, you know, as like as part of our CBT teaching, and I don't want to slag my cohort, because my cohort were lovely, but when we came back, you know, the things that people had done to do the behavioral experiment was like go and sit in Cafe Nero by themselves, and I was like, okay. And my one was like, I checked my bank balance on my banking app, and I was like, that was the thing, that was the fear that I had to conquer. But it was just that was a real moment, I think, in first year of training, of like, Jesus, you know, just a real reminder of I'm still constantly thinking about the bank balance. I'm still constantly thinking about those text reminders about what's going on.
And even like when I started eating out, my mum would be like, "Oh, you got money now, yeah? You've got money now. You don't be eating at home." And I was like, "Get over it, woman. Do you know what I mean? I'm band 6." So yeah.
Cool.
Rochelle, can I pick up on a point you made about role models? You alluded to there being a person who you met who it was just useful to see some of yourself in that person. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on kind of, I guess, the value of that more broadly, but also maybe what we need to do as a profession to, I guess, get more of that in, you know, in terms of race, but in terms of all the other kind of areas of diversity that we're thinking about as well.
I know there's a lot of work going on about this. I think a few of you guys have done it already. I offer my kind of expertise, whatever that means, to aspiring clinical psychologists who are from, I'm going to say BAME now because I can't really say QOC, from BAME backgrounds. And the point is, kind of, when I was kind of going on this journey, I just remember not having any links. There wasn't any links that I could be directed towards, and I felt really lost. And the difference is, if you're from like a middle class family, you're probably some kind of professional, and you know another professional, and then they know a professional, so you can always link up like that, and then they can kind of support you to kind of be like, oh, I know Terry's mum's sister who's a clinical psychologist, for example. So that's the reason why I feel as though, for me, it's really important to offer somewhat what I got and also what I didn't get. But at the same time, it's also important for us to recognise within our profession that there are systemic racism and barriers stopping people of colour getting onto the training course. So I would say kind of offer support, guidance where available. So yeah, if anyone is in the chat from a BAME background, a person of colour, if you're not following me on Twitter, you don't have to follow me on Twitter anyway. But if you want any advice, support, or anything on your form, just drop me a direct message on Twitter, and then I'll support you when the time comes around. And if you want to start dating now, whatever's easiest. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a kind of a related question, I think, but a related question that's come up in the discussion, which says, did you manage to find a social support network to help you reflect on these things?
To be honest, I remember when I was on training, it was difficult for me to kind of separate out what was happening in terms of race and what was happening in terms of being working class. And to be honest, no, I don't really feel as though we had too many conversations about this on the course. We've done like kind of graces, but I didn't really kind of tap into that too much. And at the same time, when you're having these kind of conversations, you're relying on people who are from disadvantaged backgrounds to kind of speak up. And on a cohort, when I was at UCL, we had like 49 people. I wasn't going to talk up to 49 people to kind of expose myself in that way. I'm qualified now and kind of got a bit more confidence, and that's why I can kind of come here and talk about how things were. But at the time, I wasn't going to do it. So I'm not sure if I could. Yeah, I'll say I am part of this kind of reflective group for people of colour psychologists, and this is something that we're starting to talk about. So that's a useful space. But apart from that, it just feels as though you probably heard it with all the BLM kind of chat going on. It requires us to kind of offer our energy and our time to have to go over that trauma to teach white people what it's like, because you guys don't experience racism. You can only learn about racism, and it means that we have to do the emotional labor to kind of have to explain all of this, and it's exhausting at times. So it's just easier not to talk about it. And it must be, if it's difficult for me being South Asian, Bengali, it must be even 10 times harder for black people to do this, especially if you're a black woman as well, a dark-skinned black woman. I can't even imagine how hard it is. So I would just say, kind of, if you want to know more about the intersections between race, culture, go and do kind of some reading, look it up. A book that I would recommend is, I'm just starting to read it, is How to Be Kind of an Anti-Racist. I can't remember what his name is. And then the other one is Me and White Supremacy. I can't remember the name of the author again. So yeah, those two. And why I'm no longer talking to white people about race by Renee, which is a good one as well.
Thank you. There's quite a few people, probably in response to your very kind offer, there's quite a few people asking for your Twitter name. You might be inundated with followers after that.
Sure. It's Gunnar Psychologist, so it's a mix between a football account and psychology. So it was initially a football account, hence why the football part is there, but it's Gunnar, which is Gooner, and then psychologist, Gunnar Psychologist. And I think the at is LF Psych, which is L for left, F for foot, and then psych. So yeah, left-footed psychologist, because I'm left-footed. So yeah.
Okay, so we just learned 2 new things about you: that you're an Arsenal fan and you're left-footed.
Yeah, and we just won the FA Cup.
Disclosures didn't plan on making something, weren't we? Yeah, congratulations on the cup. That's fantastic news.
I know.
Yeah. Well, that feels like a point for us to pause and take a break. Rochelle, I wonder if you mind putting that in the chat, your Twitter handle, if you haven't already. And I know Amy, I don't know if you're on Twitter. I know Dominic is. I don't know if I've seen Amy on Twitter. Maybe.
Yeah, I am. I don't know my name off the top of my head, so I'll find it in the break and put it in the chat.
If you want to throw that in the chat, let's do that.
I'll do that after. I'm going to go for a drink when we come back. I'll do it after. Is that right?
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, let's pause, take a break. Shall we say maybe 10 minutes and aim to come back and start again at 1:15, and then we'll hear a bit from Dominic. All right. Okay. Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
Hi folks, shall we get started again? Dominic, are you around? Response? No, what I'll just say while we're just waiting for Dominic to come back is just thanks to everyone who's chipping in with comments and links and resources. I think that's a really that's the whole idea behind these webinars. There's a few people who can talk at a time, because I think if we tried to have 200 people talking at once, it'd be a bit of a nightmare. But I think the whole idea is to bring people together and to have conversations, is to share ideas. So please do keep sharing kind of resources, things you've come across, recommendations. Yeah, let's just keep these conversations going. And that can hopefully go beyond tonight as well. I think the idea of using Twitter and the hashtag on there, the idea of that was to hopefully enable people to keep talking about these things, and hopefully connect up with like-minded people, find people to share ideas with, and hopefully say good stuff. Okay. Right, so I will hand over to Dominic. Dominic, do you want to introduce yourself? Say hello.
Yeah, so I'm Dominic. I'm a clinical psychologist, currently working in Westminster Child Development Service, mainly working with people with children with learning disabilities and autism, and their families. And I've recently got a new job, so I'm don't worry, they know about it. So I'm moving on to a kind of national specialist CAM service for people with children, again, with learning disabilities and autism, and doing a lot of work to try and keep that client group out of hospital and long-stay residential care. So yeah, learning disability and autism work has probably been a big theme throughout most of my experience, pre-training experience as well. Something I always think is quite funny about clinical psychology is sometimes you almost end up specialising before you even get onto training, which I think is strange and probably doesn't happen in other places. But just listening. Thanks so much for sharing your points to the other guys on the panel, to Rochelle and Amy, because it was just really brilliant hearing some of your experiences and reflections and stuff that's resonated with me, stuff that isn't my experiences, but it's been really important for me to hear and things like that. So I'm on last, and I hope I can keep up with the great chat that's been had. So I was thinking, I saw the last two webinars. So I'm trying to think of stuff that's a little more, that may be a bit different to talk about. But I'll just start with my background. Grew up in Portsmouth, down on the south coast. Also known as Pompey, which most of us call it. Kind of a strange place. It's a very working class city. The suburbs are all very working class as well, but kind of has a bit of a mix between kind of what you would consider more of your kind of provincial town kind of area, but also kind of a bit more of a kind of inner city kind of feel to it. And I think hearing a lot of people talking about class, I think there is a lot of geography differences in what it might be like to be working class in a rural area, working class in like a provincial town, and working class in like an inner city, big city. I think there's kind of differences, and maybe areas where people have been more disadvantaged in certain areas and maybe less so in others and stuff like that. And Portsmouth maybe had a bit of the provincial stuff, but a bit of the city. A lot of historical links with London and the East End. It's a navy town, so there's a lot of the Dockland stuff historically. So it's going up and down London Road to London. So there's a lot of kind of mix and overspill there. It's quite a large Romany Gypsy population as well. So there's kind of that element. But at the same time, it's on the south coast, kind of away from any kind of super big cities as well. So it's interesting context. A lot of deprivation, I think, in the south coast. A lot of old holiday resorts that have just, since things like the package holiday, like we're talking decades ago, but I think the effects are still felt now, where seaside towns have just turned into nothing, and there's no work and there's no jobs, and there's a lot of deprivation, and things have just really kind of been forgotten about, I think, really. I don't think there's a lot of investment in that part, and I think a lot of people think of the southeast as being really wealthy, and it's not. There is lots of wealth there, evidently, but there's also quite a lot of deprivation as well. So I grew up in the suburbs of Portsmouth. It's interesting, because at first I was going to say it's pretty homogenous in terms of things like race. Almost everyone is white and working class in some way. But I think where we've been talking about kind of homogeneity and things like that, actually, there probably was differences even when you have a population that seems to be quite similar. I think even when you just have an area that's very largely working class, and I think unlike big cities, you haven't got such gross wealth disparities kind of in your face and on your doorstep. I think it's squidged in a bit. You don't have maybe quite as the extreme levels of poverty, and you don't have quite the extreme levels of wealth, and it's kind of a bit tighter in the middle. But even so, I think there is probably discrimination occurring between maybe people who would consider themselves to be deserving poor and people who consider themselves to be undeserving poor, you know, like working class people that worked versus working class people that don't work. And so even then there's othering, and I think it's just a horrible shame that and we've spoken about kind of working class people in terms of white and people of colour, and there's racism in the working class as well, and it's a shame that there's things happen where large groups of, you know, this big people we call the working class, there's obviously lots within it where there's discrimination occurring as well. But there's a lot of solidarity as well, and I think that's a good thing, and we should find ways to try and keep working class solidarity whilst obviously recognising difference as well. So yeah, so I said I grew up in outskirts of Portsmouth, just what I would call relatively standard kind of working class background. Wasn't in massive poverty, but it wasn't a lot of money around either at all. I just kind of thought that was pretty normal, and most people had upbringing that was similar to mine. And as I went through the education layers, I think I became more and more exposed to people that were from much, much wealthier backgrounds, and each level I was then kind of exposed to more kind of wealth and kind of more people from middle class backgrounds, and I think it kind of kept wondering how many more layers I'm going to go up and whether it's going to stop or not, and it didn't seem to. So I went to a kind of a secondary school that was, again, I think it was just teachers were taken from the local area. Everybody went there from the local area. It wasn't a big kind of school that had a lot of reputation around it. It was just a random comp, and I think ambition and kind of investment in the kids probably wasn't. I don't put it as the fault of anybody, but I just don't think there was a lot of it going on there. There wasn't a great deal of kind of thoughts about people going on to do really academic subjects and going on to have professional jobs. I think a lot of people in my year group they've done well for themselves, but I definitely noticed a lack of people who are in the kind of the professional roles. Like, I think I'm the only person in my year who's a doctor, for example, and I think there's only maybe a couple of people as solicitors, and I think that's about it. So there's clearly barriers into getting into those professional kind of roles. I think a lot of this stuff starts in secondary school when people are thinking about options and where there's encouragement from teachers. And I kind of went to a separate college, and it kind of pulled a lot of kids together who were doing A levels, and then I kind of experienced a lot more probably middle class people who had come from a couple of private schools around the area. There wasn't many, but there was a couple, and other people who had come from different parts of the South Coast to kind of come to this school, and I kind of obviously noticed a lot more kind of difference in terms of people from different backgrounds and people being much more privileged, in this idea of people having a lot more money. Just take some notes that I'm kind of trying to go through whilst I'm rambling on. I'm trying to kind of think of things that are kind of interesting and safe for people to hear, as well as just my own experiences. And I think before I go on to kind of university, where I think was the biggest eye opener for me in terms of my working classness becoming a thing that I was more conscious about. I've noticed a lot of people are talking about kind of on the last webinars there was kind of social mobility as a thing, and is this a good thing to talk about, and is this not a good thing to talk about in terms of this idea that you're pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and it's all because I've worked really hard and now I've gotten to this great place, so if everyone else who's working class just does that, then it'll be no problems, and stuff like that. But I suppose it got me thinking about how people can possibly, and from a working class background, can have different areas of what you'd call like capital, if you're kind of looking at it in a class theoretical kind of position, where there was ages ago there was a BBC survey. It was a survey that the BBC really loved it, and they were talking about there's now 7 different classes and there's no more 3 classes. There's no working class, middle class, upper class anymore, and everything's so much more different. And you're allowed to take this survey, and I actually did it on my course as a trainee. We did it in one of our lectures, and it was kind of lots of different class groups, kind of elite and traditional middle class, but it's also kind of like technical middle class, and based on various different factors. And I think it was pretty problematic, I think, in lots of ways that it was kind of put together. But it got me interested in how they looked at like social capital and economic capital and like cultural capital. And actually, you can have a bit of one and maybe not so much of the other, and it might actually be impacting on you in terms of social mobility and how you're affected by barriers by being working class. And actually, I think if I think about what was helped me kind of move forward and kind of get into like psychology and get into like a middle class profession, was probably we didn't really have a lot of economic capital. There wasn't a lot of money going around at all, and we certainly didn't have any social capital. We had no connections with people from middle class backgrounds. We didn't know anybody about from who were like lawyers or doctors or kind of other professionals or academics. Just didn't know anybody, and there's no way my parents could even get me in touch with people who knew about these kind of professionals' jobs. There was nothing there at all. So socially, it was totally isolated from being able to understand where you can go forward with this. There's no one to show you the ropes or anything. But I would possibly say maybe there was a bit of cultural capital. How you describe that, I don't know. But maybe some of the interests that my parents were in. My dad grew up in Portsmouth as well, from very poor background, but did go to a grammar school. And I think he then had to start working straight away afterwards and didn't go to university. But I think there's maybe some benefits that had come from that, in terms of being able to maybe talk the language a bit, maybe being able to kind of blend in a bit. Someone's I spoke to on my cohort talked about things like code switching, where you can kind of maybe be a bit of a chameleon and maybe come across as a bit more middle class to people, and maybe kind of get along that way. So I don't know. So possibly maybe that I think of as possibly could have been a factor in terms of kind of how I kind of move forward. But I don't know, I just found it quite interesting in terms of particularly things like there was a question coming up about is Twitter a good thing to use, and are things like mentoring schemes a useful thing to kind of be a part of. And I suppose that's something that can act as a support for people that maybe don't have those connections to people who are in who have kind of professional backgrounds and having parents that know doctors and lawyers and everything else, and have psychologists in the family. And it's a great way to kind of try and get past some of those barriers, maybe, where economic capital is obviously a very different thing that someone's going to go. It's very more difficult to suddenly find a load of money from nowhere. So I just kind of thought that kind of came to my mind as people were talking about social mobility in different ways that people have kind of felt in trying to get into clinical psychology, and what may have helped and what may have not have done. So kind of back to some of my experiences, I suppose, university was probably where it became most apparent to me. I went to a uni that was kind of like like a plate glass or red brick uni or something, and it had a very large middle class kind of population of people going there. It was a big middle class kind of cohort of people who were there, and I think that's when I just really started to notice that I was just quite different to a lot of these people, and the attitudes around money was just totally different, and what should be expected or shouldn't be expected from your parents in terms of how much they can or can't help you out. And I remember an experience where I was moving between my second and third house, so between second and third here, we moved houses. And it was difficult to find houses where we were. It was in Brighton, I went to Sussex Uni from undergrad, and it was difficult to find like houses sometimes in Brighton. Lots of quite big houses in Brighton. It's quite expensive place to live in Brighton. I didn't know at the time, even though you don't get a London loan. So that was quite tricky. So I had to spend a lot of money out on rent, and that chewed up my student loan like massively. It was always going into my overdraft, like maxing it out, and then working at Asda during the summer holidays to try and get myself back up into the kind of the non-minus, into the kind of plus, and then going back into minus again as soon as I went back to uni and started paying out rent and stuff. And there was an overlap, and there was a house everyone had been settled in, and I was just like, I can't afford 2 months rent. This is impossible. Like, I don't understand why any of us would want to be doing this. And why can't you just get your parents to help you out with it? They'll understand. It's all we can do. And I was just like, I don't understand. What do you mean? Like, it's 2 months rent. It makes no sense, and it's just impossible to afford. And there's no way I can ask anybody, and I have no idea what I'm going to do. Am I going to have to suddenly live somewhere else, or do I it was hard to even own up to the fact that I couldn't afford it. So anyway, I managed to find the money at the time. Ironically, I think it was my girlfriend who I lived with, who I was moving into a house share with, was from a poorer background than I was, but had saved a bit of money and just lent me the extra few £100 I needed in order to cover the rent for 2 times. And it was just, I just remember at that particular moment, it was always stuck in me. It was just like, it was embarrassing. It was shameful. It just made me angry at people's assumptions. It also made me angry at just not being able to afford it. And I think was probably a pivotal moment for me when I was just like, God, people are living different lives and have different expectations. And one of our houses we lived in was on like a meter, so you had the little key thing that you stick into the meter in order to start your electricity going, and there's like a £5 limit once you've kind of run out. And everyone kept forgetting to top it up all the time, and it just didn't occur to anybody that this meter system was even a thing. And then I was doing an essay, and then the power just went out and I lost everything, and I was really frustrated, and everybody kind of thought it was just a bit of a laugh, and oh, isn't it funny having this meter thing? And I just kind of, I don't know, I was just already in a mindset where I was like, oh, people just aren't understanding this at all. And I must say, kind of when I left uni, found out in my last year of uni that I wanted to do clinical psychology, and it was something that I wanted to pursue. Always considered myself to be like quite a bright person. I suppose it was always reinforced to us when we were younger that we're bright and that we should push and try and go as far as we can, and education is the best route to do that. So I kind of just thought, well, I'm bright, I'll work hard, and hopefully that'll be fine. So people talked about it being competitive, and I thought, oh wow, sure, it'll be all right. Like, I'm just, okay, I'll just fall back on being clever. That's always done me well so far. But I think the barriers just became even more as things went past, and trying to apply for assistant psychologist posts, and there being lots of honorary posts in cities that I couldn't move to. So there wasn't a huge amount of jobs around Portsmouth for assistant psychologist posts and things at that time. I certainly remember there being not a lot of stuff coming up. I graduated from undergraduate literally as a recession hit, so everything just went a bit south. There was like a job advertised in different parts of the country, and I knew I'd have to move, so there's no way that I could have moved if it wasn't paid, so that was kind of out. And then I got kind of offered a temporary kind of honorary research assistant post kind of down at my old university, and I was kind of thinking, well, can I just kind of try and commute there every now and again while still working at Asda and kind of make that work? But then I got offered a support worker job up in Reading, so that was paid, and so I had the choice, kind of, do I go for the paid job or do I try and make this voluntary job work or not? So I kind of thought the finances for the voluntary job was ridiculous, so I'm just going to have to go for the paid job. So I went for the support worker job instead, which at the time I was kind of a bit miffed about, because I was just like, I'm not really that. I was like, I wish I could have done a different route, but I'm going to have to go for the support worker job. But actually, I think on reflection, I'm so glad I went for that. I went for that support worker job, because I think it was just so important experience to have. And it's a theme I've noticed throughout these kind of these webinars, where a lot of people have had their first job as being support worker jobs, and I actually haven't heard from so many people that have been support worker job as their first job. Most people I've met who are psychologists, it's always been assistant psychologist or research assistant or something like that. So that's really nice to hear, and maybe there's a theme there somewhere about going into support worker jobs. But it was really good, and I think it was really valuable experience to kind of understand the context of carrying out that job, because particularly in certain clinical psychologist positions, even as an assistant psych, your role is then giving strategies to support workers to then try and work with the people that they support, or you're kind of trying to work in around that. And actually, I noticed such a massive disconnect between healthcare professionals and support workers. I actually ended up doing my thesis in it because it was something that I connected to so much, where people just didn't get the experiences of support workers. They didn't understand the just seen a question there, was a support worker job in mental health? It was a support worker job in adult learning disability residential care. And people just didn't understand their position. There was always this idea that support workers were always lazy and they couldn't be bothered to do what they were doing, and everyone to take on new strategies. They didn't understand anything. They weren't really particularly bright people, and there was this kind of air of arrogance about support workers, and it bothered me. It bothered me because of my background and knowing that support workers, learning support assistants and things like that. My mum was a learning support assistant in a school that had a lot of difficulties, and I kind of thought, well, you'd be slagging off my mum then, wouldn't you, if you were saying that about support workers and how you feel about learning support assistants and stuff like that. And it really did bother me. And so I kind of thought, right, I need to get people to think about the context of support workers. And at the time, I had no idea what social context was as a thing in psychology. I had no idea that you had these positions of understanding context of people's lives. I just thought undergrad psychology don't teach you much about stuff like that. It just teaches you about models of child development and social psychology and things. It's good, obviously it's a grounding, but it's not applied, and it doesn't take on much stuff around social context. So I kind of figured this out myself, but didn't have any of the words to use around it, or any of the language to use. But I kind of pushed for it as much as possible. And I often notice tensions in work teams. Oh yeah, go on, Ben.
That was a mispress, sorry.
Oh, okay, I know. Okay, I thought you were fielded a question. I noticed tensions in teams, and actually, strangely, as a support worker, I kind of rocked up in my first support worker role, and it was a weird thing for a graduate support worker role that I think was just trying to tempt people into kind of going for the role as to get more experience. And I remember on one of my first or second days, there was this idea that you had to choose as to whether you were with the guys in their early 20s who didn't have a degree and the ones that did have a degree. And I was basically just code as to whether are you going to be with the working class people or the middle class people. And as someone who was from a working class background but had a degree, I was like, oh God, I refuse to be part of this. I was like, I don't want to choose, and I don't think I need to choose. I just want to be me. And that was a bit of a struggle. And I kind of was aware of tensions like that playing out quite a lot. And I think tensions, they might be called professional tensions, but I think they're often class tensions, particularly psychologists often being in a strong class position, things like being middle class largely, and often having this kind of consultative role that comes over the top of other professionals. And I think there can often be jars between us and other professional groups, particularly healthcare assistants, support workers, nursing assistants, but also sometimes other therapies, admin staff. And again, I think if you're someone from a working class background, then I think an advantage is that you just kind of get that when you go into services. You kind of recognise that people in different positions are going to have had different backgrounds, and that you might not. You would understand the context of people's lives a lot better, and therefore your kind of unrealistic kind of opinions about people and what they should or shouldn't be doing, what they should and shouldn't be doing in their role I think there's a lot more do you understand about that. So I think that's a real position. So for people watching, thinking about coming from a working class background, what can I bring to the profession? There's a lot of barriers, but I think there's a lot of benefits that you can take. I remember being, and I imagine this is probably similar experiences for other psychs from working class backgrounds, but I remember a random experience when I was in a school and I was working with a youth worker with a kid, and he was talking to me, and I think he may have had some views about what psychologist was like, and I think that came with a bit. I'm sure he had some difficult experiences with other psychologists, and he was talking to me about the work we were doing and stuff, and he kind of just looked at me, and I think I could tell he was maybe a bit confused about maybe my position on things or some of the stuff I had to say or the way I held myself or whatever, I don't know, but he said, I think you just get it. I haven't spoke to a psych before. It just kind of gets this kid's situation or gets the children's situation that we're working with, and I think that was just really empowering. And I actually thought to myself, God, actually, I think I've got something to offer to this profession. Actually, and there is a lot of barriers to getting in, and it is difficult, and can never pretend that if we just do X, Y, Z, it's all going to be fine, you're going to get on and stuff. But I think there really is a unique position for people from working class backgrounds in psychology, because so many of the people that we work with across the country are also in struggling backgrounds, and to be able to kind of understand that and understand the context is really important. Just another kind of random example in my work is a lot of the stuff that we're doing with COVID and changing to virtual teams and trying to get a lot of video calls and phone calls and stuff, and actually recognizing that a lot of people we work with might not have internet connection, and if they do, they might have a smartphone, and the smartphone might not be the most latest smartphone. It might be on pay-as-you-go, and the data might run out, and it doesn't work like a phone call where you phone somebody and you take the charges. If you're video calling someone, their data is going to get used up, and if they can't make it, it's not because they're hard to access or they're non-engaging or something like that. It's because there's literally a financial choice that person has to make, which is, can I afford like 20 quid's worth of data to have a video call, when originally I was usually just coming to the clinic and see somebody. So again, I think this comes into service design and how you're developing services in terms of the offer that you're giving people. So having people who understand those issues is really important, not just in the work you do with individuals, but also in making sure that services are adapting and suiting the communities that they are supposed to be serving. So I've kind of jumbled around a bit, but seeing if there's anything else that hasn't been said that I thought I might have a chat about. I think I've said most things I want to talk about. Training, I could talk about training. So it took me a while to get on. It took about 4 goes. I started applying when I was 24. I think I got on when I was 28. I like to say that I did London because I interviewed each one, because I couldn't move out of London. It wasn't possible. I'd moved to London for work, and then I was with my wife and we lived together, and there was just no way of me moving randomly across the country to go to a different university. So it was London or bust, basically. So I just kept applying to the 4 London unis and hoping that one of them would take me on. And I did the rounds and got reserve at one place, but it didn't work out. And then eventually I got on at youre, my last go, and I'm really pleased that I ended up there. I remember someone telling me that once you you always tend to end up at the place where you're supposed to end up. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it kind of felt right for me that I kind of landed somewhere which suited me and was interested in some of these things, social context and kind of different inequalities and how they all intersect and things like that, which is obviously a very strong point at youre. I was kind of proud to kind of position itself in that way. Training was interesting in terms of class, I think. Probably my cohort got fed up with me banging on about it a lot. I'm sure they did. But it was just something I was interested in, so I always kind of thought that I always picked it up in lectures and things that I thought was interesting in relation to that. But I'm also aware that I was privileged in other ways, so being a male, being white, so there's kind of intersections there. And one thing I've always kind of thought about with things like intersectionality is that obviously there's ways that people can be disadvantaged in multiple ways, obviously, and that's a lot of what we talk about, where someone might be from working class backgrounds and they're black and they're a woman and they've experienced some of the care sector and all kinds of lots of things adding up in disadvantage. But what I also think is quite interesting how people are kind of disadvantaged and privileged in different ways that can kind of knock off against each other. So somebody may be privileged and disadvantaged in total opposite ways of somebody else, and how that creates so much tension. And I think, so for example, I don't know, somebody could be a working class bloke and a middle class woman, and so the working class bloke can't talk to sexism, and they've obviously had benefits from being a man, whilst the middle class woman obviously has benefits from being middle class. So I know that really always interests me, and I think those things can often play out in progressive circles, and how kind of a progressive university course can also be like that as well. And I think I don't know. I think there was tensions around things like that, and I don't really know how to address those kind of tensions. And I think a lot of people just want to be heard, and I think there's a lot of fighting around space, and people want to get their voice across. And one person might be really interested in talking about class, and someone else might really want to be talking about race, and someone else might be talking about gender identity, sexuality, and how do you make room for all these different things and all these different spaces that we need to talk about so many important issues, and where some people are privileged in some ways and disadvantaged in others. It's such a minefield, and I think it's something that I think about a lot, constantly trying to go around in my head trying to find answers and solutions. I don't have any, but I do think it's an interesting thing that I noticed. I think the more I've gone towards things like into kind of spaces that talk about this stuff, but also where I obviously have my own blind spots, lots of blind spots as well. Sorry, Will, you got your hand up. I'm probably running way over time. I think that's probably all I have to say. So I'm happy to wrap that up.
Sorry to interrupt you mid-flow, but I want to make sure we don't keep.
Yeah, no worries. That's fine.
So thank you.
I think that's my reflections and thoughts. Yeah, done. So.
I'm so sorry, because I think I've introduced Will to that hands up button, and he's going to use that.
Maybe use that. I just thought we've got sort of just about 10 minutes left before 9 o'clock. There's been a couple of really nice questions that have come up that I just wanted to maybe ask the whole panel, like all everyone that's here, because I think perhaps people have different comments on it. So we'll start with Rachel's. It's a really nice question, I think. She said, do you feel extra pressure as a professional due to being working class in a middle class profession, as in pressure to represent working class and improve the systems that we're part of, or if pressure responsibility plays a part in that journey at all?
Oh, it didn't unmute me then. I think, to be honest, because I've never spoken about it before until these webinars became a thing, I've not felt the pressure at all, but I think that's probably because I've not acknowledged it anyway. So there hasn't been the pressure there. But I think it'd be interesting to, think about how that progresses as these conversations carry on, and
I think it's not linked to class necessarily, but I have never been more aware of like my minority status in terms of my sexuality until I got into clinical psychology. Like, it's aggressively heterosexual, and like I don't know, I'd never ever really entered my mind before. But in terms of like, I don't know, just being part of a cis, like whatever group, just feeling like a bit of an outsider in terms of that experience and just what that's like. That's been really, really strange for me, and I've never, it's bizarre, I've never been to so many baby showers in my life than I have since I got on to clinical psychology. And being very aware, it's not just about people being heterosexual, it's just that it's a very specific I just feel out, and I think that was something I was really mindful of, just coming through training, and just like being qualified in general, just feeling a part. I think definitely feeling a part because of my background, but I think I've never felt as a part because of my sexuality before than I have until I became a clinical psychologist, which is interesting, I think.
Dominic, Rochelle, any thoughts on this idea of kind of feeling the pressure to speak out on certain things?
I think there is. I think maybe some people feel more able to do it than others. I think the working class probably get a bit of a reputation of being a bit shouty anyway. So we kind of do. I think there is a kind of a history of kind of pushing what stand up for your beliefs and what you think is important. I do kind of, I suppose there is a bit of a pressure to try and make sure that things are heard and that things are kind of understood, maybe by some of our other colleagues who aren't from a working class background. I suppose it can get quite tiring, and sometimes I have times where I'm like, you know what, I just want to kind of forget about it all and forget that it's not a thing and just kind of carry on. But then you kind of always get pulled back when you notice more things, and you kind of want to keep on keep on with it. Again, I think like Rochelle, I think I was really close to like just not doing this and like pulling out, because it is quite anxiety provoking to kind of push yourself out there and to kind of have such a space just to talk about this stuff. But I kind of thought, no, I've got to do it. And I think I often do feel glad that I have said something or done something, even though leading up to it, you kind of often think, oh, maybe I don't want to be doing this. I don't know if that answers the question or not. Sorry.
Sorry, Will, can you just ask that question again? Because I was typing when you guys were talking.
Yeah, I'll have to scroll up and find it. Sorry. So it was about, I'll kind of paraphrase it. It was about, do you feel pressure as a professional due to being working class in a predominantly middle class profession, and in terms of kind of pressure to represent working class and to talk about and think about these things in terms of improving systems?
To be honest with you, this was while I was on my doctorate, while I was training. This was something that I felt quite ashamed about at the time, so I didn't do it at the time. I'm clearly Asian, so because at times when I used to put on the posh voice and stuff, I tried to hide it. So I didn't do it, and it's something that I regret. And it means, I know a lot of people talk about getting into kind of clinical training. You have to kind of mold yourself into this kind of idea of what a trainee clinical psychologist looks like. So I think for someone like myself, there's going into certain spaces is really kind of very anxiety provoking to kind of then speak out when you feel othered already is a lot to ask. So I feel as though sometimes we have to kind of go through the motion, qualify, get that confidence, get that power as well, being qualified, and then we can start speaking out. But it is very daunting to kind of bring up some of these issues, and then have to kind of give examples and talk about all of that. So I did it personally, and people that are listening, if you don't as well, don't kind of like judge yourself too much or criticize yourself too much for doing it as well. And it's not an individual effort, it needs to be a collective effort. And the people in positions of power, they're the individuals that need to recognize how individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds and kind of minority backgrounds kind of are affected by this very middle class profession. And they're the ones I feel need to kind of talk to us and think about what needs to be changed.
I completely agree, and I think that kind of idea was maybe a part of the idea for setting up these webinar spaces in the first place, to try and sort of open a bit of a space to have some of these conversations and think about some of this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So if the course leaders, for example, are watching this or hearing about this or following on Twitter, these are conversations that kind of they've listened to us talking about it now. They can take it back and think about these issues and how they can kind of make changes to the structure of the course in a way that will help.
Absolutely. Thank you. Just to maybe finish, there was a question a bit earlier, or rather, let me scroll back to, sorry, I didn't write down the name of the person who asked it, so sorry if I've missed your name. But the question was essentially about how much to talk about this stuff at an interview, how open to be about this stuff, and how to put this across in a useful way. Now that stumped everyone.
Yeah. Well, for me anyway, I put a lot of this stuff on my form anyway, and I was told to not kind of cover all of this up and throw in buzzwords like MBT and evidence-based practice and all of that kind of stuff, because everyone's going to be saying this stuff. And the advice I got was to basically show them who I am on my form. So that's what I did. I talked about being Bengali, growing up in East London, being Muslim, the work that I did within my community with imams, for example, and all of that kind of stuff. So I talked about that kind of stuff. I don't particularly remember the interviews too well. I completely messed up the UEL interview, which is embarrassing to think about now. And then the UCL one, from my memory, the UCL one, it was more kind of like question, and then you kind of gave your answer to the question, and it was more kind of like university challenge or something. Like, do you know the answer to this question? And the youre one is just complete haze. I was so desperate to get into youre, I completely messed up. Had a panic attack. So yeah, that's better not to think about now.
Thanks, Rochelle.
I was just going to add in, actually, Rochelle, I had the exact same but opposite experience to you. My UCL interview went awful. It was just a horrible experience. And then I had the youre one like the next week, and luckily it went all right. It's just my so exact opposite to you. Yeah, and I don't know. Talking to the question, I don't think I necessarily spoke about my experiences exactly in like detail in my interview. I'm not sure the questions necessarily kind of led to me reflecting directly on my experiences, but I think they can come through in your answers in terms of how you answer a question. I think and things like, especially questions that might relate around things like which relate specifically to social context, or thinking about difficulties that you might have, or how you might work with certain client groups and things like that. And I suppose you would bring your experiences into questions. I said, Rochelle, I can't remember any of my answers. It's all blur. But I imagine that's a possible way into it. I think some other unis ask you very specifically, directly about your experiences in an interview, but I think they're also different. They're a bit of a different vibe.
Thanks, Tom.
Oh, yeah, I think my interview was recent. It was like last year, because I'm first year, so it's quite fresh in my mind. But I remember talking about my experience, kind of in a question about kind of mental health. So I was talking a lot about financial pressure, and maybe not necessarily talking about working class identity, but talking a lot about stuff that comes with working class and how that impacted mental health within the family and stuff. But I'm also aware that the interview that I did at Lancaster, they started by saying like they're not bothered about work experience. Well, they are bothered about work experience, but they also really care about personal stuff. So they say right at the beginning, like, if you've got examples from personal life, you can use them. It doesn't have to be about work. So it was kind of already invited to do that in a way. And I never got anything from my application form, so I don't really want to give advice on that, because I don't know how good my application form was. I only had an interview at Lancs, so use the tests.
Thank you. It's coming up to 9 o'clock, so I'm going to bring us to a close there, if that's okay. Sorry if I didn't quite get to your question. If you're on Twitter and you want to send any questions over, feel free to tweet either myself or Ben or any of the panel. If you've got any other questions more generally, our email address is beyondthetherapyroom@gmail.com. And just last but not least, I'm putting a link to the feedback survey that we do in the chat. So it would be really cool if you could just take a minute or two to just fill that in. So we're basically collating responses about the webinars as we do them, but also using this as an opportunity to get ideas from folks about what they want from future projects, future webinars. So please do fill that in if you can spare a minute. Okay, that's about it from us. I just want to say a big, huge thank you to Amy, to Dominic, to Rochelle, for taking the time, giving up their evening to come and be so open and so honest, and to think so reflectively with us about some of these things. So thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated. I hope it's been a useful webinar for you, and I'll send details around for the next one. Hope to see you all there next time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.